Hey guys, thanks for tuning into YouTube Morality. My name is Remy, and today I'm going to speak about a concept I've actually gotten a lot of requests for. You wanted to hear it, so I'm going to deliver. I'm going to talk about moral progress today. I'm going to talk about what different scholars have to say, take some of that relevant information, and discuss maybe a new form of moral progress that I believe maybe will allow us to build a better moral world. Let's look at that current model of the moral mind that I always talk about. This is supported by Jonathan Haidt, and it's what he calls a social intuitionist model. Haidt believes that moral judgments are shaped by quick, automatic moral intuitions, and that moral reasoning is a secondary effect. An example Haidt uses is that of moral dumbfounding, where people are given a scenario. An example would be a brother and a sister having consensual, protected sex, and people are asked to determine if it's right or wrong. Well, morally, there's not a lot wrong with this because all cases of pregnancy and disease are actually accounted for. If they're doing just for pleasure and they want to, so there shouldn't be much wrong. But people can't seem to provide an explanation other than the fact that things just don't seem right. This moral dumbfounding um, is an example of how that Haidt uses to illustrate how moral intuitions kind of shape our moral judgments, where we have these quick responses that he describes us as lawyers defending a case rather than a judge weighing the evidence. Now here's Haidt's model of the mind, kind of breaking down the different aspects of the two systems. And I want to focus on the two first aspects that he touches on. The first, the speed at which they arrive at the conclusion, and the unintentional versus intentional or controllable aspect of these systems. Now, proponents of this view include Victor Kumar and Richard Campbell, who talk about the dual process model. They say moral system 1 is one of perhaps many domain-specific capacities. It's effective in the sense that it involves emotional processing. Now, system 2 is cognitive, only in the sense that processing does not involve emotions. Now, what does that mean? System 2, it seems, one is more aware of. While system 1 is that quick judgment. As we go back to the chart, we're going to see that the mind is divided when it comes to moral views. I support this example, and I think Haidt provides an excellent illustration, going back to the judge and lawyer example. Now, people like Paul Bloom do acknowledge the fact that Haidt is onto something where there is an intuition involved in moral judgments. But Bloom, in his book, or in his article, How Do Morals Change, he actually wants to discuss that, how morals are changing. And he doesn't think, he's a little unhappy because he doesn't think that moral change is explained through the intuitionist model. Now, I would agree with Bloom there. And he offers two explanations, better ones actually, explaining why morals change. And I think he's onto something here, so I'm gonna explain this a little bit. The first idea is contact, which I'll touch on in a moment, and the second one's deliberation, which I think it actually provides a deep foundation for my views, which I'll explain, maybe foster a new method of moral change. So contact is what Bloom's says is the effect of meeting new people. So as we travel, our social circle widens, so does our moral circle. This can be just meeting new people. You don't have to travel for that, but it's just where people go, you're going to experience different views, and those views are going to shape new views. The second one is deliberation. Now, he calls it deliberate persuasion. Bloom says that we're natural storytellers, and that the power of these stories can influence one's views. Examples include Nazi propaganda in the Second World War, shaping people's views on Jews, or Uncle Tom's Cabin, the novel that helped contribute to ending slavery. I believe that Bloom is onto something, like I said, and I want to tap into the rational part of the mind that Bloom is trying to do so. I think it can have an effect on our morality. An example of this, explaining moral change through maybe a more rational thought, would be in Eileen Reynolds' NYU article on gay marriage, the changing landscape in the U.S. She calls upon Patrick Egan, who is a public policy specialist, to kind of explain what causes the change in people's attitudes towards gay marriage, which is now for the first time a majority in the U.S. where people support gay marriage being recognized by law. Patrick Egan, has two explanations for this. The first is what he calls cohort replacement, and the second is kind of an education versus religion standpoint. Now, cohort replacement is simple. It's like arithmetic. When an older generation once held certain power, a number of people in the voting power, their views are going to be the dominant ones. But as time goes by, and I made a little illustration, this is nowhere near accurate, but it's just for you guys to see kind of what I'm talking about. Time's going to progress, and the older generation is going to die out as we see the orange shrinking, and the blue's growing. The younger generation is growing up, and more people are going to have the voting power, more people are going to vote, and those views may become a little more dominant. What I think is really interesting is how Egan relates education and religion with the cohort replacement. So we see that the younger generation is more educated, and I would like to think more rational. We see in states where populations tend to support gay marriage, there's actually also higher levels of educational attainment and lower levels of religiosity. This could be said the same for states that don't support gay marriage, where they have maybe less education and little more religiosity. Now, this idea kind of ties back to my main point. So, we've accepted the dual process of the mind, and we want to explain moral development, moral progress a little more. So, using Bloom's deliberation and Reynolds' education, my view kind of relates that we need educated deliberation to foster moral change. Now, this is where what I think actually changes from what we've already discussed. Instead of education or deliberation on as affecting morals on their own, I think they, when applied to the dual process model, will give us a greater effect. And what I have to support this is a new technique of mindfulness training, which is supported by a psychiatrist named Judson Brewer from Yale University. Now, mindfulness training, or MT, was used to quit smoking. And it can actually be understood as just being aware of the mental processes. Brewer asks his patients to be curious of the process, of the cognitive process, in this case, in smoking addiction. So in the experiment, Judson, whenever patients have a craving, Judson wants to get those patients to tap into that, and he explains this in a short video.
Now, with mindfulness training, we dropped the bit about forcing and instead focused on being curious. In fact, we even told them to smoke. What? Yeah, we said, go ahead and smoke. Just be really curious about what it's like when you do. And what did they notice? Well, here's an example from one of our smokers. She said, mindful smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yuck. Now, she knew cognitively that smoking was bad for her. That's why she joined our program. What she discovered just by being curiously aware when she smoked was that smoking tastes like shit. Now, she moved from knowledge to wisdom. She moved from knowing in her head that smoking was bad for her to knowing it in her bones.
So in the video, Brewer explains how a woman was able to experience smoking for what it was, rather than a pleasure-seeking mechanism or impulse to have a cigarette. In his paper, he notes that MT provides a decoupling of the association between craving and smoking. And I think that this point, how it's extremely effective in getting smokers to quit, can be applied to other emotional responses. At the University of Toronto and the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, they actually tested this idea through a study of applying MT directly to emotions. They were able to subject subjects to sadness, trying to provoke their sadness, and through MRI scans of the brain, understood that MT was successful in limiting reactions to sadness. And therefore, they argue that it may be a path to reducing sadness reactivity and disorder vulnerability. Now, my idea is that through mindfulness training, we can affect those emotional processes, have a little more control over them. And I want to go back to this model of the mind, where the initial distinction between system 1 and 2 is the fast, slow, and intentional, unintentional, or automatic / controllable relationship. I see a new relationship here, MT would mean that one is exercising their conscious cognition to understand the fast and automatic aspects of System 1. Similarly to smoking, an immediate feeling or moral judgment would be generated. This is like a craving. People would choose to act on that, so they would create a judgment from that intuition, or they would just smoke a cigarette. Both processes in the brain are very similar from my point of view. So if we apply MT directly to moral judgments, I think that we can understand where our views come from, limit the negative ones, and I think this would also limit the moral dumbfounding that I discussed earlier. Application of MT would involve all of our thinkers, so that's why I've coupled them all together just for you guys to see. But I think that it would involve the dual process model supported by Haidt, Kumar, and Campbell, and then the education and deliberation is what's very important. So I think that we could include education on MT, which would obviously help people realize their potential and perform it better. They would better understand where these judgments are coming from, and they would be able to identify when they're exercising their curiosity what is exactly causing their intuitions from System 1. So to kind of conclude, I believe that the dual process model of the mind is an accurate representation, and it doesn't on its own it does not explain moral change. So I believe that the dual process model of the mind is an accurate one, and it does depict how the mind is made up. However, I think that MT allows us to understand where these System 1 judgments are coming from, and from this going forward, we actually are able to foster new moral progress, a different kind. Rather than deliberating solely to change morals, we will be able to change how we see our morals and then better understand them. This might be able to see how negative emotions are developed through different emotional responses, and the more embedded emotional views people have might be able to be reshifted or reshaped. This would be kind of similar to how Brewer's patients have been able to successfully quit smoking. Finally, I just want to lay it out kind of flat for you guys. So the social intuitionist model, if we use MT as deliberation, System 2 is better able to understand System 1. We're going to have better awareness of our moral intuitions, and then finally more controlled moral intuitions and judgments, which could lead to moral progress. Thanks guys for tuning in. I'll be back next week with another moral concept here on YouTube Morality. Take care. Have a great week.